Thank you, Supervisor Sears. You know, the topic of intimacy was a bit of a risk for us on the Symposium Planning Committee. We toyed around with it. We kind of went back and forth. Let's just start being frank right now. We thought you'd all think we were going to talk about sex for 3 hours, and we thought that might make people a little uncomfortable, even me. But we also thought that maybe intimacy would be especially poignant for people who may have recently lost a spouse or a partner or a good friend. And as was just said, we know that intimacy doesn't go away when we lose someone important in our life. It doesn't change as we get older. So we evaluated things and said it was more important that we talk about intimacy and the importance of it to our well-being and longevity than to not talk about it this morning. So we were delighted to get the lineup of speakers that we have. Starting with Dr. Walter Bortz. Let me read you a little bit about Dr. Walter Bortz. He is a clinical associate professor of medicine at Stanford University School of Medicine and a graduate of Williams College and the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. He's recognized as one of America's most distinguished scientific experts on aging and longevity. Dr. Bortz's research has focused on the importance of physical exercise in the promotion of robust aging. He has published over 130 medical articles and authored numerous books, including We Live Too Short and Die Too Long, Dare to Be 100, Living Longer for Dummies, and Diabetes Danger. Dr. Bortz is past co-chairman of the American Medical Association's Task Force on Aging, former president of the American Geriatric Society, current chairman of the Medical Advisory Board for the Diabetes Research and Wellness Foundation, and Enough. One more. And senior advisor to Healthy Silicon Valley. Please welcome Dr. Walter Bortz.
Give me a hand. Here we go.
Good. Okay.
Thanks. Why did I get invited here? I'm still puzzled by that, but I'm figuring it out. My first badge is I'm 87, so it gets me in the front door. But the second is my wife died. 62 years married, 4 kids, 9 grandkids. So I've got a double credential, and I don't like it. So I'm here to learn, because I'm on the prowl. Match doesn't work for me. I've been there, tried that, and I'm struggling. I used to know how when I was 15 years old. But I'm 87 now, and I've kind of forgotten all the world to-dos and not to-dos. But I have a daughter, 2 daughters, who want to fix me up. So Dana says, Daddy, you're 87, and if you're going to start hanging around with women, you got to watch your breath. I said, I'm 87. I haven't thought about my breath in my whole life. But and how about a pedicure? I said, I take care of my nails. I'd be embarrassed if anybody saw me having a pedicure. So it introduces me to a whole different era of my life that I had no training. I was giving a talk in Atlanta 4 months ago, and I said, I'm 87, but you're 27. I was 27 yesterday, and you're going to be 87 tomorrow. So how do we get so old so fast? It reminds me of the story of how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? If you look in a mirror and say, how old is that guy looking back at me? Is it who you are or who you thought you might have been? And I was on the Phil Donahue show some 20 years ago, and it was a hell of a program. It was in Chicago, and they had 4 centenarians. And one was a very salty 101-year-old from Rochester. And she said, Phil, have you heard the story about the old gentleman who was on a crowded bus? And Phil said, uh-oh, what am I into now? So the old fellow sitting there dutifully reading his newspaper, and he looks up, and here's this gorgeous babe in a tight red dress right in front of him. He said, "Young lady, I know I'm an older fellow, but I'd be very happy if he would take my seat." And she shook him off and said, "That's fine, sir. Thank you very much." But then in a moment, the bus jerked to a stop, and all the standees were hurled into a mass in the front of the bus. And so they eventually disentangled, and he went back to reading his magazine. And he looked up again, and there was a lady in front. And he says, "Well, young lady, in light of what just happened, to decongest it, why don't you sit on my lap a minute?" Don't wait a minute now. So she says, "Sir, that's very kind of you, but I'm all right." Then she calmly settles herself down, and they go about their way, and the bus on its bumpy road. And the fellow taps her on the shoulder again, says, "Young lady, I'm sorry you're going to have to stand up again, because I'm not as old as I thought I was." So how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? So I'm here to talk to you about intimacy, and I know a little bit about it. I'm learning. It's on-the-job training right now. But I'm known in my area of exercise. I've run 45 marathons. I was in Boston when the bomb hit. I was way back. I didn't care about winning. I care about being there. But I'm known as exercise, and I just completed a course down in Santa Barbara where I taught a course on the science of longevity. Now we know what growing old is. We know how long we can live. We didn't know. My parents died Dad was 74, Mother was 95. They didn't know how long they could live. They looked back to their grandparents. Everybody was dying in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Artifactually, they did not know how long we could live. We are the first generation in the history of this planet that knows how long we could live. That is such precious knowledge, and I'll end with a quote from Carl Sagan to that effect. I'm now involved with a group in Los Angeles called the Gerontology Research Group, and they are interesting because they focus not on centenarians. Anybody can be a centenarian these days. But a supercentenarian is somebody special. A supercentenarian is somebody over 110. So there are a group of people worldwide now, academics, who are studying supercentenarians, if you're 110. And there are now recorded 300 worldwide. It is estimated there are another several hundred who have not come out yet. So we're getting older faster. But I know the head of that outfit, and I asked him up to Stanford to talk at one of my conferences I put on there. And he was up there regaling us with these pictures of people 110, 115. And the take-home message of his lecture was, you don't want to be 110. You're pretty well spent out there. And the Greeks had a moral about that, about Tithonus. Tithonus was a mortal, but had the disadvantage of falling in love with Eos. Eos was the goddess of the dawn. And so they were getting it on. But Tithonus was mortal. And so Eos asked Daddy Apollo to do him the favor of granting Tithonus eternal life. And Apollo was kind of PO'd by that. But he said, okay, since you care so much about him, I grant hereby Tithonus has eternal life. But what he failed to do was give him eternal youth. So Tithonus comes to us today, according to Greek mythology, as the chirp of the grasshopper. So every time you hear a grasshopper, think where that came from. But here I am now, 87, and I'm not through yet. I'm writing my 9th book called Aging is Negotiable, and the start of it goes as follows. Most people my age are dead. Someone born in 1930 should have died 15 years ago. But I'm not only not dead, but I've got work to do. I'm here to work. I'm not here to be an observer. I'm here to be a participant. So my magic word, along with engagement that I hope we can talk more about, is necessary. Because I was friends. I have a wonderful man by the name of George Sheehan. For any of you runners remember who George was. George was a great cardiologist who gave it up to run. And he used to write beautifully in Runner's World about running and its spiritual aspect. And I was taking care of George as he was dying of prostate cancer. And we had a correspondence. And he came to me one day and says, you know, Walter, I figured it out. When I was 5, the world was perfect. My pants were dry and there was good food and my bunny was good and mommy and daddy were. And I loved being 5 because it was so perfect. But then I turned 6 and everything went to hell. So what happened when I turned 6? That's very profound sort of an observation. He said, I figured it out. He said, when I was 5, I kept asking, why, Mommy? Why, Daddy? Why? When I turned 6, I started asking, how? How do I tie my shoes? How do we get to So we then go through this life transition early in life in which we stop asking why and ask how. And in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he quotes Nietzsche, who said, a person who understands the why of life can put up with any how. So we're so immersed in getting through the day, but we forget what the hell is the real context of this life. So that's the meaning of life, and I love to get to that. And I can't ask you what your meaning in your life. It is so highly personal, highly introspective. But you can ask me, because I'm supposed to know what I'm talking about. But if you ask me why I am, what's my meaning in life, I go back to Granddaddy Bortz. And Granddaddy Bortz was a butcher in western Pennsylvania, and I was the little fella under his skin. And he said, well, go make yourself necessary. Now, what he meant by that was scat, get out of here. But now at 87, it resonates. I'm here to be necessary. And my major issue is energy. I believe in energy. That's my God. I worship it. The second law of thermodynamics. I talked from the pulpit at Trinity College, where Schrodinger gave the major talk on what is life. Life is a transfer of solar energy into us. That's what life is. And we are the conduit. I had a Nobel Prize winning friend who coined the term dissipative structures. What we are individually is a bunch of schnapps: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. We're schnapps held together by energy. When you take this schnapps out of the flow of energy, it goes to hell. And I'm most known for an article I wrote in the AMA Journal in 1982 called Disuse and Aging. And the story of that article was important because I had fallen at Stowe, Vermont, and pulled my Achilles tendon off, miserable. So I was operated, sewed the tendon back together, and hobbled around, tried to make rounds on a long leg cast, which was tough duty. But when they took the cast off my leg, I looked down at my leg and I said, my God, look at that leg. What a miserable, horrible, withered, painful, purple leg. That's not my leg, that's an old leg. I said, but it ain't old because the other leg's just as old. And it wasn't because I pulled the tendon off, because the surgeon could have put the cast on the good leg and the same thing would have happened. So it struck me, this major homology between aging and disuse. So our article in JAMA was Disuse and Aging. And what it was a recital of my going to the Stanford Library, getting out all the books on aging and all the books on disuse, bed rest. And it turns out they're the same. What happens to your heart, your brain, your pecker, your muscles, your heart? It's the same thing. When you don't move, you lose. So movement is life. Movement is energy transfer in all its parameters. So this article I've just submitted called The Physics of Aging has to do with energy transfer. So internalize that as an idea because it's profound and it will endure. I was giving a talk in Nashville at Vanderbilt to the second-year students. Here I was in the auditorium and I was being profound. I looked up into the audience and I said, here are you second-year students. I was a second-year student yesterday. But here 50 years later, you're different than me. You're young, you're South, you're white, you're black, I'm white. You're female, I'm male. So there were big logistical differences, but bigger differences were knowledge. When I was a second-year medical student at Penn, when I was 25 years old, we didn't know anything. If it had turned us loose, we would have been dangerous. We just got insulin. We didn't know anything about genes. We didn't know anything. We were very boldly ignorant. Now, Moore's law says knowledge expands, doubles every 5-10 years. So you take that, calculate back to what I knew then and what they knew now. It's vastly different. But a bigger difference than knowledge was money. When I was in medical school, medicine was a humble little cottage industry. My dad was a big doctor. My father was president of the AMA. And Dad was a little private doctor, and his patients often paid him with barter. I have in my house oil paintings that were Dad's payment for his services to these. Can you imagine me going into the Stanford accounting office with an oil painting in my... I would like to pay my bill. That'd have laughed me out of there. So the difference between these students now and my student me then a short while ago was vastly different. I said, oh, how different we are. But then it struck me. I said, despite these profound differences, the one thing that unites you and me is the mission of medicine. What did I just say? That's pretty good. I said, but what is the mission of medicine? And I didn't know. I've never seen it consecrated in any holy writ. So I made it up, and I offer it to you for amendment or rejection. The mission of medicine is the assertion and assurance of the human potential. The mission of medicine is the assertion and assurance of the human potential. Why are we here? Why are we alive? I submit that's as good a religious calling as there is, to make the most of yourself. So I'm now a student, we are all students, of the human potential. The first thing was, how long do we live? And we didn't know how long we could live. I was a friend of Norman Cousins, one of my great joys. And Norman used to tell the story of Johnny, who was a very dissolute student, who was noticed by his mother one day over in the corner working on a project. She said, Johnny, what are you doing over there? Mom, don't bend. I'm doing something important. What are you doing, Johnny? I demand to know this minute. Okay, Mom, if you got to know what I'm doing, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the mother says, oh, that sounds like something you'd be doing because nobody knows what God looks like. And he says, they will when I get through. So I say to you that we've not known what a whole human life could look like. The oracle at Delphi said, hold this precept most sacred. Above all else, know thyself. Well, how could you know yourself when you're dead? We didn't know how long we could live. Now we are the first generation in the history of this planet that knows what a whole human life can look like. We know how long we can live. We know what the horizontal description of our life portrait is. Do you know that on the other side of your birth certificate is an expiration date? If you turn the birth certificate down there in the corner, is this expires on 100 years from your birthday. And I assert that as a powerful overriding truth that we've just found out. Our natural biologic endowment is 100 healthy years if we don't screw it up. So my book title is Aging is Negotiable. You cannot get away from the laws of thermodynamics, despite what the immortalists claim. There are these frauds out there that tell you you can live to be 180 to baloney. We are deeded a certain lifespan by our physics, and that is immutable. You're not going to live to be 130, 40, 50, no matter who's going to con you into that. But we should live to be 100 healthily. And it's cheap, safe, and it does not depend on your ancestors. If you want to live a long time, choose old grandparents. Baloney. We did a study in that, and how would you know how important heredity was? You get a bunch of twins. Twins have exactly the same DNA component, precisely. So if heredity was dominant in how long you're going to live, then twins should die simultaneously of the same condition. Follows? So we then found a cohort of 30,000 twins in Washington, the survivors of the Second World War, and we matched them up. Found that identical twins die 6.2 years apart. Non-identical twins die 7.3 years apart, and same birth date, people die 8.1. So you turn them by a statistician loose on those data. Turns out that heredity is 15% of how long you're going to live. So that's a good news, bad news story. It's like a bank account. When you got $150,000 in a bank, big spender. When you only got $1.50 in a bank, you got to watch how big a check you write. So it ain't the cards you're dealt, it's how you play the hand. And I like that because I'm also, as we all are students of the Serenity Prayer. Change what you can, accept what you must, but know the difference. So if we were fated to die when our grandparents did, we wouldn't have much to shoot for. But if you come into my office, for example, and tell me that all the male members of your family died on their 84th birthday, and you're 83, I don't say good luck at that moment. I say, what did they die from, and what are you doing to avoid those shoals that are out there threatening you? So life is a choice. And I'm very taken by the assertion given by Marie Garibaldi, who was the Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court, who she was ruling in the matter of Farrell et al. Farrell was one of these unfortunate women who had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and was killing her incrementally, being sustained by tubes. She says, let me out, this is torment, I don't want to live, let me die. So it went to the New Jersey Supreme Court, and Farrell, in her assenting opinion, letting her die, said matters of fate have become matters of choice. Profound. Matters of fate have become matters of choice. We are alive at the historical moment in which fate no longer rules. What matters is choice. And the difference between fate and choice is knowledge. I was on a CNN a while back, and I was beating my chest about how living to 100, thought I was doing a good job. And the MC took the mic and said, thanks, Dr. Bortz, that was very excellent. But tell me what you think, and gave it mic to Tilly in the front row. Till he said, I don't believe a word he says. These doctors don't know what they're talking about. Said, have you ever met an old doctor? All old doctors are dead, she said. Said, every time I feel like taking a walk, I lie down. And she says, I love fat. And she showed exuberant evidence of that. So Tilly had the whole audience revved up because she just punctured this pompous professor from Stanford. And here I'm on nationwide television. What do you say to that, Dr. Bortz? How do you react to that? So the words stuck in my mouth, but I finally came out with, I respect the right of anybody to say, I'm an American, rights matter. But, I said, rights derive from responsibility. And we're not responsible. You forfeit the right. Dead air. Time for a station break. I said, my God, what did I just say on national television? Rights come from responsibility. And the difference between rights and responsibility is knowledge. So we are newly franchised to know what a whole human life can do. And it's wonderfully challenging, but it's also threatening. Because now we have a blueprint. This is how we should live 100 good years. I sometimes invoke the ugly word abortion. Now, we all hate abortion. It just grates at who we are. We can't stand the thought of abortion, unlived life. But I turn it to you and said, if a 70-year-old or 75 or an 80-year-old also is not living to their potential, is that not an abortion? Isn't that an unholy abdication of responsibility? So that's my message to you. I'm learning, but I'm dangerous because I'm lonely. My wife was a good caregiver, good mother, good runner. Then she got Alzheimer's. And that was Grimsville in situ. Horrible, because she also got nasty. Get your ass out of here. But I kept her home. She died in our bedroom after a fall hit her head. Boom. 85 years old. And it was tough duty. But it was a relief. Thank God she's gone, because she was a dishonor to herself. I took her to a wedding a couple of years ago in Montana. I had to call the cops 3 nights we were gone because she was so disruptive. So don't get Alzheimer's disease. It's a horrible disease, and we don't have a good treatment. That's part of what I talked about in Santa Barbara. The one thing, if you go to all the Alzheimer's clinics in the country, the one thing they will recommend is exercise. Why is that? Because we now know there is a compound out of the hypothalamus called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's a peptide, a protein, and it comes out of your brain in response to exercise. So of all the things the body does to support the brain, exercise number one. Exercise is a 30-year age offset. A fit person of 70 is biologically the same as an unfit person of 40. And I have lots of slides I can do. And it's never too late. Bortz's law is never too late to start, but it's always too soon to stop. You can't expire your responsibility, no matter how old you think you are, because you owe it to us. I have a friend who gave me a coffee cup, and on the front of it says, "Make yourself necessary." So that's as good a reason to get out of bed in the morning as there is, because to me, again, it's all energy. There is this composite. The first law of thermodynamics is there's a finite amount of energy in the universe. Ever since the Big Bang of 14 billion years ago, there was this amount of energy spread over the entirety of the universe. That is stable. But the second law is It's constantly changing. It's dispersing. And the word for that's entropy. And I wrote a paper long ago called Aging is Entropy. We're born as this little concentric unit, an infant of high energy. Watch a newborn. And as we get along, we're going to increasing disorder, which is by thermophysical principles. Aging is entropy. So it's our responsibility to know this, to husband it, to keep it together. We need to keep ourselves fit and together. 30 years difference. Now I want to close by citing from you a statement here in my book, We Live Too Short and Die Too Long. Had we been born 50 years earlier, we would have wondered, pondered, speculated about these issues. But we could have done nothing about them. Had we been born 50 years later, the answers would, I think, already have been in. Our children will have been taught the answers before most of them will have had an opportunity even to formulate the questions. By far the most exciting, satisfying, and exhilarating time to be alive is the time in which you pass from ignorance to knowledge on these fundamental issues, the age where we begin in wonder and end in understanding. And all of the 4 billion year history of life on our planet, and all of the 4 million year history of the human family, there's only one generation privileged to live through that unique transitional moment, and that generation is ours. Carl Sagan said, understanding is a form of ecstasy. And that is so grappling to me. I love it. I'm happy to be alive. I need intimacy. So if there are any volunteers out there, I have my Viagra in my pocket. So I'm ready. I'm on the prowl, but I'm not doing so good so far. So I'm looking forward to any tips along the way. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we have time for our Q&A. Dr. Bortz, that was so inspiring and heartwarming
Who are you
and
talking
funny.
to?
There was some guy up here a second ago. And you've mentioned a couple of times you're on the prowl. We hear that. And I imagine when you and your wife first met and you were dating that things were different then, maybe not. But now there's so many of this technology. There's these apps for your phone. There's Facebook. There's many different ways that you can find and connect with people. I'm curious, are you using any of the technologies?
Everybody heard the cry. Yes, I am grudgingly. But one thing that really sours me on our world is going out to dinner and see the table next to it, and the kids are all not talking. Now, what is that doing to our humanity? I write a blog for Huffington every Tuesday. And 2 weeks ago I said, silicon cannot feel. You cannot substitute a brain cell for a chip. A chip can't see a sunset. A chip can't hear Goddard-Demeron. Chip can't have an orgasm. So we're much more than this. But down my way is occupied by technology. And there's a whole outfit down there called Singularity.
Yes.
Singularity thinks we're replaceable by machines. Robots are going to take over the world. Not on my watch, they're not.
Very good. So if you have questions or comments for Dr. Bortz, hold up your index cards, and we have people that will grab them. There's Michelle over in the corner. Anybody have a question or
Anybody
here's one over here, and we will give
Anybody need a prescription?
Anybody need a prescription? Oh, you've got lots more hands with that. Who knew coming here today? You have your mic, Mo. Go ahead and.
Oh, wow. Your penmanship is so fantastic.
Don't embarrass me now.
You said your wife had Alzheimer's.
You said that your wife was a runner? Did she run?
You said your wife was a runner. Did your wife run into her late years?
My wife died at 85. She won the Boston Marathon twice for people her age group. She also was an alcoholic, and she smoked. And the brain is our most sensitive organ. I have a friend back in Washington. She just wrote a major paper that's helpful. She says 20% of us are dying in our 60s of a cancer. And cancer's terrible, frightful, miserable. 20% die of cancer in our 60s. Another 20% die in our 70s of a single end organ problem. Heart, kidneys, liver. That's 40% dead, leaving 60% of us to live to be 80. What happens when you're 80? The most fragile part of us is our brain. So more and more, we're having this epidemic of Alzheimer's disease. And we're no good at it. We don't know. There's no preventive. There's no drug. And it's brutal. It saps the world of its energy. So we must do our damnedest to stay well. And I think we're having a little brain exercise.
Yes, we are before
later.
lunch.
We have a question over here. What do you think about utilizing CBDs for pain?
Pain is the ultimate did everybody heard the question?
And could you tell us what CBDs are, because we don't know.
Yeah, the question was, what do you think about using CBDs for pain? And we weren't quite sure what CBDs were.
Who asked the question?
Who asked the question? What is CBD? Medical marijuana. What do you think about
I'm all for marijuana.
Okay.
My daughter Dana has her patch at home. She gives Daddy someone he needs. Rarely do I go there, but she uses it for her old neighbors, because the big indignity of the end of life is pain. No person should die in pain, and the medical profession does a terrible job at reassuring. There should be no euthanasia, because people are afraid of dying in an uncontrolled, painful existence. But that's the doctor's fault. We should assure everybody that thou shalt never have pain. And pot is a very good recipe. We're mature. We're so immature. I fought much up in Sacramento against when is it okay to die. And we don't know that yet. And here's another little take home. When we decide that it's time to die, when we're no longer necessary, when we recognize that our energy quotient is spent and we're only then ever to be a burden, the way to die is to stop drinking. Not just food. 4 days without fluid and you're dead. And it's cheap, it's safe. All one needs to do is moisten the lips. And it's the normal way to die. But you don't know that because we in the medical profession don't want you to know that. We want to keep charge of you till the last gasp comes. But that's not fair. You should be franchised to know when you can and are able to die. And that's Dr. Bortz's take home for the day.
Thank you. Hey. Couple more. Another question over here. Erin has it.
So we have a couple more, both with similar themes about the influence of heredity and genetics. Whenever I call my 82-year-old parents, my mom always answers the phone and says, "Can I call you back? Our fitness trainer is here and we're working out." So I've learned to prioritize exercise from my parents. do you agree that heredity matters in this way? And then a very similar question said that at the aging conference at the College of Marin last year, put on by Stanford, they talked about life expectancy being 25% genetics, 25% lifestyle, and 50% luck. And what do you think about that?
Well, thank both really good questions. Most of our determinants, I wrote a paper for the American Journal of Public Health. There are 4 things that kill us. First, like a car. You're a car, be a Ford for a minute. Design, accidents, maintenance, and age. Same thing for a car, same thing. Accidents, maintenance, design, and age. Does design matter? And I quoted statistics. Yes, you could put an exponential of 15% on design. Most of the misformed babies are expelled in utero, natural abortion. So most babies that are born are okay. So genetic diseases is trifling, leaving us with accidents. Of course, accidents matter. Things happen intercurrently, of which we're not masters. But the biggest thing is maintenance. Like a car, fuel and RPMs. You need the right amount of fuel. The nutrition story I know about. It ain't what you eat, it's how much you eat. And the world is being killed now by obesity. It's the National Geographic quotes globesity. So it's not just America, it's the whole world is getting fat. And we have no good hand. But the surgeons want to operate on you. I said, to operate on a person for obesity is like amputating the fingers of a smoker. It ain't what you got to do. And I had an earlier part of my career dealing with obesity. I used to write articles on it. I had one guy came to me. He weighed 691. And he came to me as a research subject, and I had a big NIH grant, and I put him in my ward for 2 years, paid him $10 a day, and fed him only explicitly what I fed him. He lost 512 pounds. He left my ward weighing 149. We had to take 2 big flops of fat off his gut. I called him 2 weeks ago. He said, Dr. Bortz, you saved my life. He went to Israel. He got married, had 2 kids. I tried to use the word reincarnation in my story of him, but the editorial people thought that was a little too flamboyant for a medical.
That's great.
But nonetheless, he lived that long, and so I'm almost finished. I give 2 long answers. So maintenance is lifestyle, the right food, the right amount of food, and RPMs. And the biggest measure of RPMs is a test called VO2 max. VO2 max is how we extract oxygen from the atmosphere and move it to our mitochondria. That lets us live. So VO2 max you measure by putting a clip on your nose and a mouthpiece, and then you puff on a treadmill or a bike and measure how you take oxygen. So I had mine measured in Australia when I was down there last year. And I got off the bike and they said, Walter, you're 50. I was 80. So fitness is a 30-year age offset, having nothing to do with genes, having nothing to do with anything, doctors, pills, just what it is. I wrote one of my blogs I was proud of in Huffington. I said, fitness is the oboe's A. I'm a big fan of the San Francisco Symphony. Grew up with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Now, you know, as you go to the symphony, before the orchestra starts, there's tumult on the stage. Everyone's fussing around. And then what happens is the concertmaster comes out, and you hear this A out of the oboe, and the whole orchestra comes into tune. That's what exercise is. All 20,000 genes are listening to the oboe's A. And when you're not fit, everything rattles. But when you're fit, everything comes. Time for another half-hour answer?
Would you be up for one or two more questions? And then okay, Mo has one over here in this corner.
All right. With the framework of what about touching and holding, how can you get your need for touch met if you lose a spouse or a partner? Possibly massage? Please weigh in.
How do you do it? Well, you tell me. That's what
Well, the second part of the question was, what's your phone number? But I'll let you expound on the first part.
I have some assistants at work. My daughters are after me to affiliate. And my major daughter lives in Santa Barbara. And I have a whole list of contacts in Santa Barbara. But it's Santa Barbara. And that's 300 miles away. Among the people she introduced me to was Jane Goodall. Jane's gorgeous, sleek, magnificent. She lives in London. So I've had this correspondence with her, said, when you pass through. So intimacy's very difficult to accommodate if you live in London. So accessibility is on my list as you go. It's fine to have all the other stuff. But the top of my list is nice. The second is smart. Third is cultured, loving music. Fourth is pretty. Fifth is tender. Accessibility rules it all. Because if you ain't accessible, it's all fantasy. So I'm on the prowl, and I'm looking for all the help I can get.
Last question, and then we're going to take a break, and you may have an opportunity. Okay, last question.
I'm not sure how I could top the last question, but this question talks about, I love giving my 91-year-old mother who has Alzheimer's a foot massage to relax. Why don't more assisted living places focus on proper, healthy, loving touch?
Oh, there you go. Do we have any legislators here? We should be encouraging that. We should be demanding it. I'm for co-ed nursing homes. We should put some bounty. Pregnancy should be encouraged. Here's a good one to end on. An editorial in the British Medical Journal observed, quote, "What we thought was bad for you may actually be good for you, but it may not be good to tell you in case you do it too much. And it is certainly not good to tell you it is good for you if you do too much of it already." Thank you very much.